Welcome to our continuing education client exclusive webinar. This webinar is going to be focused on UTXO management and consolidation spends. So some of you maybe have been receiving emails from our team about UTXO consolidation. We just wanted to really actually get something put in place content-wise, spend an hour with you, talk about this stuff, address any questions you might have as well. So today, it's going to be me as your host. I am the technical director of our concierge service here at Unchained Capital. My name is Tyler Campbell. I'm joined today by Buck Purley, who's a senior software engineer and our team lead for the custody products, and also Matt McManus, who's our product manager for the custody products. So Buck and Matt, definitely introduce yourselves quickly. Buck, we can start with you.
As Tyler said, I'm a senior software engineer, and I work primarily on the vaults, which is part of our custody suite of products. Also, some of Caravan. My previous webinar that I did was on advanced Caravan functionality, which included coin selection in Caravan, which is our open source multi-sig wallet. And I've also just been interested in fees and good UTXO management for a while, and wrote an article, which I think we'll probably be sharing some links to, that's on our company blog about what Bitcoin fees are, how to optimize the fees that you're paying, et cetera. So that's hopefully what I hope to continue teaching today.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm Buck's partner in crime on the custody products team, and this is my first webinar, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
Awesome. Good stuff. So the agenda today is going to be, again, UTXO management and consolidation as the general topic. So the theme with these continuing education webinars is we want to make sure that our clients are confident in what they're doing with their multi-signature vaults. And that comes with, knowing not only general key terms, which we're going to go over here in a second, but also larger themes now. With great power comes great responsibility. With key management comes responsibility as well. And UTXO management really ties into that. So that's what we're really going to be focusing on here today. So the agenda at a high level is going to be these key terms, which we do for every webinar that we run. And then we're going to break it down into, actually add a little appendage onto the key terms for what is a UTXO. So Buck is going to walk us through what is a UTXO, why is it important to do consolidations, what are we actually doing this for, and then I'm going to do a little consolidation demo. I'm going to swipe over and show how to perform a UTXO consolidation from within your vault. Then I'm going to kick it over to Matt, and he's going to go over good practices, prevention tips, so you don't have a bunch of UTXOs stacking up into your vault over time. And that'll make sense as we get there towards the end of the webinar. We'll round it out with some advanced consolidation using Caravan, our open source recovery tool, and then we'll cap it with Q&A at the end and make sure that we are going to be addressing questions that you might have as we go throughout this process. I do want to take a second before I jump into key terms to mention that we are going to be fielding a question after the what is a UTXO section, and then also after I do the demo, and then of course at the end. So there is going to be time for you to submit your questions. We do understand that this is relatively complex topic, something that is spoken about on Bitcoin podcasts, or maybe it's out there on Bitcoin Twitter, but actually diving into this stuff, we want to make sure again that you feel extremely confident with the subject material at hand. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the key terms. Our first key term, as ever, is Bitcoin address. So your Bitcoin address is where your Bitcoin live. The industry is settled on hardware wallets for these guys that we all know and love, but that, I believe, brings with it a connotation of the idea that Bitcoin lives in these devices, and that's just not true. Bitcoin lives at addresses. So addresses are constructed from public keys, which we'll touch on here in a second. And an address is really shown to you in a couple ways. So in our platform, we show you your multi-signature address in both a QR code format, which you can see there on the screen. Makes it really easy for your phone to scan if you have a mobile Bitcoin wallet. But then also we provide you your plain text address that starts with a 3. You'll see an example there. For the single signature address on the left, and then the multi-signature address on the right. The addresses look nearly identical. It's just how many public keys were we using to construct that address. So Bitcoin lives at addresses, and balances are tracked by the Bitcoin blockchain. So right now, the Bitcoin blockchain is about 400 gigabytes in total size. And that encapsulates, all of the Bitcoin that's out there on the Bitcoin network. You could look up a Bitcoin address into a block explorer and see the balances on it. So that really goes a long way to ensure that 21 million supply cap, that hard cap, is verified independently. You can, run your own node and look up an address on your own, block explorer, or you can go to some public block explorers and look at all of this information in a really transparent way. Now, Bitcoin addresses. We just talked about addresses and we said they were constructed from public keys. So what is a public key? Well, you can think about a public key as a lock to a given address. Public keys are data generated from private keys, which we'll touch on in a second, and they're used to construct addresses. So your hardware wallets like Trezors and Ledgers and Cold Cards, they share public keys with wallet software like Unchained, Trezor Suite, that Trezor.io, Ledger Live is another instance, to build addresses. So we want to think about the public key as what is used to construct an address. And going off of that public key idea, we then have the private key. So if the public key is the lock, the private key is the key that unlocks Bitcoin from a given address. So the private key is the single key to an address. Hardware wallets, your Trezors and your Ledgers and your Cold Cards, they know how to use this private key to sign transactions and spend Bitcoin. These devices are really, really good at leveraging private keys. Every private key is going to have a corresponding individual public key. And, bleeding into our next term here, going off of public key, private key, and the very next term will be extended public key. So this is also talked about a lot, whether you're listening to podcasts or reading about Bitcoin. It's often referred to as an XPub. So extended public key, XPub. And if our public keys are locks, you can think about an XPub or an extended public key as a master lock. So an XPub can derive nearly infinite individual public keys. So if we have a public key constructs an address, you can think about it as an extended public key constructs a series of addresses. So extended public keys are shared with wallet softwares in order to build a series of addresses or a wallet. So a seed, and that's kind of that last bullet point there, but let's think about, okay, where does an extended public key come from? Well, a seed, which we're going to touch on next, can derive nearly infinite XPubs or nearly infinite public keys. So many of you are experiencing this now. If you're taking part in our Bitcoin IRA product, you may have a device with one seed that you're using for your personal vault. You added your extended public key to your personal vault, but your same seed, your same list of words that you have can also be used to share an extended public key for your retirement vault. So it's really, really powerful. We're starting to see how powerful a seed truly is, and we'll touch on that in just a second. A really good analogy for an XPub is you can think about it as a raffle ticket roll. The ticket to understanding XPubs that's highlighted down there in the bottom right is a fantastic article making the analogy between public keys, private keys, and analogizing them to a roll of raffle tickets. It's written by our senior software engineer, Justin Moore. I definitely suggest that you check that out. Maybe bookmark it if you want to keep your Bitcoin continuing education going this Friday. Definitely suggest checking that one out. So the seed is the master key. I've said seed a couple times. You may hear it when you're setting up your devices as a backup as well. So the seed is the most important item you can protect in your Bitcoin setup. You generate or derive nearly infinite private keys and public keys from one seed. So we talked about that, just a slide ago. One seed can generate nearly infinite extended public keys, which generate public keys, which generate addresses. So the seed truly is the seed from which everything else is derived. Because it is so important, that's why we want to make sure to always secure it physically. That's why when you set up your devices and you gather your seeds, you write them down and you don't take a picture of them or put them in the Notes app on your phone. Now, I say that tongue in cheek as I'm showing you a 24-word seed here on the screen. So this is a bold move, but just want to let you know what a seed actually looks like. So seed can be 12 words, 24 words. Different devices may generate them differently for you. I do have clients ask me oftentimes, is there a difference? Should I be worried if I have a 12-word seed versus a 24-word seed? And The answer is no. The amount of randomness that's involved in 12 words for a seed is still a number so inexplainably large that it really does not compromise your security when you have a 12-word seed versus a 24-word seed. It's just a trade-off that individual hardware wallets and hardware devices choose when generating these seeds for the user. So our final key term for our key terms list before we dive into UTXO specific content is your wallet configuration file. So last Friday, if you are on Twitter, I did a Twitter thread about your wallet configuration file and about how we can really think about it as the directions to your multi-sig address, and more specifically, the treasure map to your multi-sig addresses. Your wallet configuration file could be used to rebuild and reconstruct your multi-sig wallet if your wallet software is unavailable. So from an Unchained perspective, we think about this as Justine, my colleague, calls this the doomsday scenario, right? If Unchained is unavailable, our website's down, what you'd be able to do with your wallet configuration file is use another wallet coordinator software like Caravan, which we'll touch on here in this webinar, Sparrow or Electrum, to rebuild your multi-signature wallet and have access to your Bitcoin. The configuration file has all of your extended public keys that were used to create your addresses, and it has directions that your private keys can follow if you need to ultimately move your Bitcoin. So this wallet configuration file is available for our clients in your Vault interface. It's the 3 vertical dots in the upper right-hand portion of the transact tile under the label external spend info. And you can download this file to your computer. Now, while this file can be kept digital, we do recommend that you secure it, possibly encrypted or behind a password manager, because it is, from a security perspective, if somebody accessed this file, they wouldn't be able to move your Bitcoin. They still need your 2 keys. But what somebody would be able to do if they were Bitcoin savvy is they could take this file and reconstruct your wallet, and they'd be able to say, oh, Buck has 100,000 Bitcoin. Maybe, that's a privacy risk and you don't want that exposed. So it is worth, taking those additional security steps, even when you do have it downloaded. So with that being said, I'm going to now hand it over to Buck to cover, what is a UTXO and why is it important to do consolidation? So without further ado, Buck, off to you.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Yeah, so before we get into the consolidation, why you might want to do that, we wanted to start off by demystifying some of this technical jargon, because apart from anything else, well, UTXO, weird acronym, what does that mean? But even before we get to what that exactly means, one of the things that's kind of weird about Bitcoin, or the important thing to understand before we get even to the consolidations, is that Bitcoin is basically, it's a different mental model from what we're used to in traditional finance and even most other cryptocurrency blockchain systems out there. So what most people are used to is, we'll call it an account or a balance system, right? So if you think about your account in a bank, if somebody sends money to your bank account, the bank has a database, and in that database, there's an account associated with you, right? Maybe has an account number, a routing number, and an account number. And if somebody sends you money or you send money out, a database entry is just updated. So you have a number that's associated with you. Okay, my account has $1,000 in it. I send $500. Now it goes down to $500. That's it. So Bitcoin is a little bit different. The way that our balances, as Tyler said in part of the key terms, your Bitcoin is lives kind of in addresses. That's what the blockchain is checking. But what does that even mean, right? A transaction in Bitcoin, and this ties into the balances, is made up of inputs and outputs. Anytime you're sending or even creating a transaction, you are selecting a bunch of inputs and you are pairing them with outputs of what Bitcoin you would like to send, right? So all balance history is essentially a chain of these transactions throughout time. So if Tyler sends me 1 Bitcoin, he must have some inputs that add up to 1 Bitcoin that he puts into his outputs. This is also represented by data, and that data is what's sent to the Bitcoin blockchain, which you can see underneath here, right? So we won't talk about the metadata, but you can see here the inputs reference a previous set of transactions, or each input references one single output that was sent to me. And you could have multiple inputs to add up to those outputs. Most transactions will also have two outputs because that would be your destination and then change coming back to you. Now, the reason why this is one final thing to understand about this is that the inputs need to add up to the value of the outputs that you would like to send, right? So let's say I've been DCAing, dollar cost averaging 0.1 Bitcoin every month, right? In order to send 1 Bitcoin, I need to collect 10 inputs that add up to 0.1, or that add up to 1 Bitcoin total. And I'm ignoring fees for now, just for simplicity. So let's go into the next slide. And so yes, this leads us to what we mean by a UTXO. And again, this is just kind of technical jargon. What it stands for is an unspent transaction output, right? So remember, we have a transaction that has these outputs. I have an output that's sent to me. Before it's spent, before I've added it to another input to create a new transaction, it's now an unspent transaction output because I haven't spent it yet. And so this diagram below shows what this process really looks like. So you can see here, I have a wallet, and it's actually kind of helpful to visualize this almost like a normal wallet, right? Let's say I'm getting, you think of your kid that's getting a quarter as their allowance or whatever from the tooth fairy or whatever. And your kid is collecting these. At some point, you can create maybe $5 out of all of these quarters, right? So you put them together and you convert them into something new. And this is actually what consolidation looks like, which we'll get into a little bit more, right? We're putting these inputs together, or these UTXOs, which were outputs, making them inputs and sending them out to be outputs.
Perfect. Thank you, Buck. So the next topic, also covered by Buck, is going to be why it's important to do these consolidation transactions. So I just switched over to this agenda slide just to show everyone, and Buck, I'll let you take it away again.
All righty. Okay, so why is it important to consolidate? The first reason, and this is if any of our clients on the call might have received an email about this, that one concern is, since everything that Unchained does is with hardware wallets, this is not something that you would have heard if you're with any other Bitcoin or crypto company, because most are custodial, right? They're taking care of all of this for you, the signing and everything. But when you're managing your UTXOs on your own, you're doing this with a hardware wallet. And one thing to understand about hardware wallets is they're basically very little resource-constrained computers, right? So on them is a chip that's made for one very specific purpose, and that purpose is actually pretty computationally expensive. These cryptographic operations that hardware wallets have to do, primarily signing, can actually take up a lot of resources. So if you have a lot of UTXOs when you're creating a transaction, right? So if we think back to that diagram that we had before, and you have 10 UTXOs that your wallet needs to sign, that's a lot of work for that little computer to do, because all of those, it's basically a big transaction. There's a lot of signing that has to go through. And there are limits that these hardware wallets will eventually reach. Now, it's hard to, they don't give hard caps because it depends on the nature of the transaction and how much data is involved. But once you start hitting the 20 to 30 input level, these devices will could actually freeze up. They'll run out of memory. You'll even notice, though, once you go from 1 input to 5 or 10, even though the device can handle it, you'll notice it take a lot longer to sign. Like it could actually take up to a couple minutes. And so it'll seem like the device is frozen up, but nothing to worry about. It's just working through all of these processes. So one reason to consolidate, and again, consolidation is that process of taking many UTXOs and turning them into a single one. That can help you in the future in case you end up with too many UTXOs that your device can't handle. Now, another aspect that I think is really important, and I don't think many people really appreciate, is this idea of protecting against higher than average fees on future spends. Actually, I want to mention while we're on this topic, this was asked in the chat, and I wanted to highlight, some people might have heard that there are concerns with consolidating UTXOs because you're clumping them all together around privacy. This is true, right? So what you're doing is you have multiple spends that have come to you, and now you're associating them together. What I would say to that is it's a concern, but there's also trade-offs. So if one thing to think about this let's say you are sending dollar cost averaging to your vault, or to any, I mean, this is a problem, this exists with single address as well. You're buying on an exchange and then you're sending to a different wallet. You bought that Bitcoin on an exchange, your exchange is KYC'd, so you're not really losing any privacy by associating those coins together and then sending them to a new output. What I would caution against is if you have any UTXOs that you want to keep separate, well, then you probably don't want to consolidate with them, because now you're associating your ones from an exchange with ones that were maybe a gift or some inheritance or something like that, something that you don't want to necessarily mix together to make aware of balances. So that's just something to be aware of. But there are these, one thing you could do is consolidate. If you're keeping them in different addresses, just consolidate like for like, essentially, right? So next thing is higher than average fees. So this is why, like, it is a trade-off. So fees can be important, especially if you have an urgent, like an unpredictable urgency for a transaction spend. If fees are very high, then you don't want to be stuck having to spend a lot of fees. Now, why do we have to spend a lot of fees in this type of situation? Again, this is something that's a little bit different in the land of Bitcoin that we're not used to. So if we're thinking back to that balance or account model, you just have one single number in that database that's associated with your account of how much Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, but how much value you have. In Bitcoin, the value is all of the UTXOs associated with all of the addresses that you might control. And then in order to create transactions, we are making bigger transactions that have more data. The way that pricing works in the Bitcoin blockchain is based off of amount of data you're sending, not the amount of value you're sending, right? We're used to thinking about in credit cards, you pay a transaction fee, or in wire fees, there's a flat fee and then a percentage fee about how much you're spending. In Bitcoin, it's about how much data. And the reason for that is that every participant in the Bitcoin network is responsible for that data as well. So full nodes are going to verify that data. They're going to check all the signatures. Miners include that in a block. And because there's limited block space, which is a mechanism to actually make sure that the cost, the market responds to these costs of the data, you're taking up more space in a block that could be used by somebody else. So you want to pay for that. A good analogy of how to think about this is when we pay for shipping fees, right? So in this example, this diagram we have, you could send 50 pounds of teddy bears. It's going to be a very light box, right? So it's not actually going to be that expensive to send. On the other hand, if you're sending a much more expensive and valuable laptop, even though the laptop could cost $2,000, it's relatively light compared to the 50 pounds of teddy bears, and so it'll actually be cheaper. Not thinking about insurance, of course, it'll be cheaper to send. Another way to extend this metaphor even further that also applies to Bitcoin is urgency, right? If you're trying to send something, especially a very heavy box around Christmas time, when, well, we won't even get into supply chain issues, but right when a lot of things are trying to be shipped, there's limited resources to ship things. And so if you're taking that up, you're going to have to pay for that urgency. The same thing in the Bitcoin network. If the network is getting very active, you're going to be competing with other people that might have more or less urgency. So this is why we say in this bullet point, you're protecting against fees on future spends, right? This is why it's important to do consolidations on kind of a regular basis. If you watch, we have some tools available actually to give you alerts when fees are low. If you see fees are low and you have some UTXOs, you can consolidate them now while fees are low so that when you have a spend that you want to do later on, you don't have to spend extra, right? So if you're spending, if you have 10 UTXOs, I consolidate them into one and fees are at 1 or 2 or 3 sats per byte, Satoshis per byte of data. That's the rate, right? How much Satoshis I'm paying per byte of data that I'm sending. If I do that now, then when the fees are 100 Satoshis per byte, I'm sending much less data at that point in time, and so my fees will be cheaper. Now, one last slide on this. I think it's really important to highlight that many people, even if you're not new to Bitcoin, take this for granted. And that's because most of us are used to using custodial solutions, right? So when Coinbase or Cash App are holding your Bitcoin, we don't realize a lot of time that they are doing this for us because they have to pay fees or they pass on the fees to customers. And if they have a lot of UTXOs, it can be expensive for them to send as well, right? So this is a graph that we have from Glassnode, and you can see it's the total number of UTXOs in the network. So as the network has grown, the total number of UTXOs has gone up, right? Because you have more and more people sending UTXOs, sending Bitcoin transactions. But you can see here too that there are dips, right? There's a particularly big one at the end of 2017, but they're throughout, and if you zoom in, you would be able to see even more. And what's going on here is the exchanges, which have a lot of UTXOs, they will wait for good fee environments, consolidate the UTXOs. If let's say they have one UTXO that's 50 Bitcoin, they can have a much smaller transaction to do payouts to all of their customers, right? And that saves a lot on fees. And this is something that the exchanges and the custodians are doing for you, but with Unchained, right? You own your own keys, right? You control your own keys, and so this is a responsibility that shifts onto you as somebody that is now responsible for their own wealth.
Awesome. Thank you, Buck. That was a really good overview of both what is a UTXO and then why is it important to do these consolidations. Again, thinking about potential, device constraints, resource constrained computers, but then also to ensure that you have a favorable fee environment. So before I hop into how to perform a UTXO consolidation from the Vault interface, I want to ask Matt, looking through the Q&A, was there any Q&A items that came through while Buck was talking that we could address here before I do my demo?
Yes, there's a couple. I've answered a few in the chat. We'll be covering those later in the webinar as well. But Buck, one question that came in for you is a seed the same as an XPub?
That was covered earlier. I think also in the key terms, a seed is like your master root. It's the root that generates all the other XPubs from it. So you can actually generate an XPub, I believe, from a seed, but it's not the same.
Yep. Then I had another one coming that says, I DCA daily. Are you letting me know that I may see unexpected fees?
Yes and no. So I would say, so first of all, and we'll get into some of these trade-offs in a bit later. Matt will take care of it. But I do want to differentiate between absolute fees and a fee rate, right? So it actually won't be unexpected in a sense. Like the absolute fee you can expect will be higher if you're sending more data. It depends on where you're storing the DCA. If you're DCAing to your own wallet and it's a relatively small amount, you could end up having to pay a pretty high fee. But there are ways that you can split up the transactions. It also depends on what you're sending, right? If I'm DCAing 0.1 Bitcoin, not every day, every week, every month, and I don't want to send 1 BTC, I want to send 0.5 BTC, that's less data, right? I'm only using half of the UTXOs that I would need to send 1 BTC. So it's all relative, it all depends. Part of this UTXO consolidation idea is about basically planning for the future in future states that you can't really predict, right? And you might want to just, you're just essentially preparing for that. So I think I really like the example of internal to the Unchained ecosystem, right? We have vaults and we have loans. If you think about how your loans collateral value could fluctuate, sometimes we'll have clients that, if the price goes down very quickly, need to send more BTC to increase their collateral ratio, right? If fees are really high at that point in time, and you have a lot of UTXOs, it can be very expensive. But remember, we said urgency also can affect like how much you can end up paying. You can't predict when that's going to happen. So if you're DCAing on a regular basis, and again, you can do this split up when fees are lower, when fee rates are lower, then the absolute fee that you will pay at that time when you have that urgent transaction will be optimized. Hopefully that answers that question. It's a really good question. And I think that's like hits at the core of why we're doing this webinar in the first place.
Awesome. I was going to say that exact same thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to swipe on over to my vault, one of my test vaults, and actually perform a UTXO consolidation. So let me go ahead and do that. And I'm going to make sure that I sign into my test vault using my two-factor authentication, which is certainly a best practice from a security perspective. So just one moment while I grab my Authy code. Perfect. So I'm signing into my test environment here. And you see that I have my main vault. So I've creatively titled it, of course, main vault. And I have a small amount of Bitcoin confirmed into this vault, about 56,000 sats or $34.43 worth of Bitcoin right now in my vault. And you're going to notice as I scroll down into my vault, I have, of course, my keys over here on the left, Volcano and Puppy, but then I also have a transaction history. And you know what? I wanted to just DCA this morning, really early in the morning. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to keep buying Bitcoin just because I woke up and felt like I wanted to buy more. So I have a bunch of UTXOs we can see here just in this initial look at our transaction history. I just have a bunch of deposits stacking up over time. So you can see that there's rows here of my deposits over time. So there's about 9 deposits here. And, you know, if I were to keep making deposits like this every day, or if we go through, you know, the holiday months and I'm continuing to deposit Bitcoin into my vault, this total number of transaction history, these total number of deposits are going to go up. And it's going to be, you know, eventually 30 deposits, 40 deposits. And that's having a lot of UTXOs on my vault address. So what I would want to do as a best practice, and I think Matt is going to get into this, you know, in just a little bit from a prevention standpoint and a best practices standpoint. But what I want to do is consolidate my UTXOs. And consolidating my UTXOs, turning my many UTXOs just into one, the way that we do that is actually just doing a withdrawal from your vault. It's just making a Bitcoin transaction of any amount outside of your vault. Because what we're doing then is we're taking the remainder amount of UTXOs, kind of what's happening in the background is that remainder amount of UTXOs is being consolidated up into one that goes back to a new address that you control in your vault called your change address. So that's kind of happening underneath the hood. And to actually do that, and it is really helpful just to do it on screen as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a withdrawal out of my vault, but I'm just consolidating. I'm not going to be sending Bitcoin to Buck or to Matt or to anyone else. I want to keep my Bitcoin. I just want to consolidate my UTXOs. So I'm going to be spending to myself. So I've created another vault using my 2 keys. And I'm going to go ahead and select transfer in the platform. So that's another common question I get is what's the difference between withdraw and transfer here in the interface? Transfer is if you do have multiple vaults within your account, you can select transfer and it's just going to allow you to go ahead and pick another vault to spend to. So I'm going to spend to webinar vault that again is very creatively named. And I'm going to go ahead and select next here. And I'm going to enter the amount of Bitcoin that I want to consolidate. And what I want to really do in this instance, I'm just going to send, you know, about $5 worth of Bitcoin. So what that's going to do then is going to populate the amount of Bitcoin over on the left-hand side. And then I have the ability to choose my fee rate. I can either choose a high priority fee or a low priority fee. If I select high priority, it's going to be a pretty high fee estimate because you're going to see here, and to Buck's point earlier, fees are at 14 Satoshis per byte. And that's just to get you into the next block. It's a pretty high fee if we're just looking to send $5 worth of Bitcoin. So even at a low priority, it's still going to be relatively expensive. And because I don't, you know, urgency is not you know, on the top of my mind as I'm thinking about this consolidation spend, what I might want to do is even go over to the custom field and edit my fee down a little bit. Let's cut this 12 sats per byte in half to 6 sats per byte. Now, if you're doing a UTXO consolidation, your fees are going to be, you know, larger than expected. So right now, if I'm going to consolidate the UTXOs in this vault, I'm okay with paying this fee just to consolidate all of my UTXOs. So I'm going to go ahead and select next here. And now I'm going to be able to select the co-signers. Who's going to actually sign for this transaction? By default, I have Puppy and Volcano both selected as signers. So I'm just going to keep that and go ahead and select next. Then I get a chance to review my withdrawal transactions. So I'm going to be sending from my main vault to my webinar vault. And there's the amounts that I had selected earlier. I'm going to go ahead and select create transfer. And when you select create transfer, nothing is sent to the Bitcoin blockchain yet. What we essentially did was we drew up the details of the transaction itself, but we still need to actually sign. So we should be taken to the transfer page in just a second here, where we're going to be able to sign for this transaction. And I am on VPN over here on my side, so apologies if I have a slight delay here in my environment getting up and running. But what I'm going to be able to do now is get my Puppy and Volcano devices with me here, and I'm going to actually be able to provide my signatures and send this Bitcoin over to my other vault to consolidate my UTXOs. So to do this spend, I'm going to take my Trezor Model T. I'm going to plug it in to my computer. It's going to power up, and I'm going to enter the PIN of my device. Once I have verified my PIN, I'm going to select Trezor here and then sign with Trezor. Now, this is a process that many of you are familiar with, even just through virtue of being onboarded and setting up your keys. You get taken to a new tab where you're able to allow once for this session, and your device is then going to be displaying to you on the screen of the device, is it okay to send this Bitcoin to this address? What I'm going to do is press the green check mark and hold my finger on the device to confirm. And it might take a little bit longer to sign for all these UTXOs, so that's something to be aware of. I only had about 9 UTXOs to sign for, so it signed relatively quickly. But if you do have, a number of deposits in your vault, it's completely normal for your device to take, a few minutes, upwards of maybe even 5 minutes to provide that signature. All right, what we should be able to do now that we have a successful signature with Puppy is we're going to do the same thing for Volcano. So let me go ahead and plug in my other Trezor device. And do the same thing to enter my PIN and unlock the device. And we'll select Trezor and then sign with Trezor to complete the signature also from this device. So I'm going to get that same message on the screen of my Trezor. I'm going to hold my finger down to confirm. And it's going to go through that spinning wheel to sign for all of my UTXOs. And we should see a success sign here in the platform. Once both keys have successfully added their signature, what we're able to do now is press broadcast, and we're going to actually send this Bitcoin. We're going to broadcast it to the Bitcoin network, and it's going to be then sent over to my new vault. And all of the UTXOs now in my existing main vault are going to be consolidated. So we should see that come through in just a second here, and I can select broadcast. And we'll give it just a moment while it's broadcasting. So really the main point being a consolidation transaction or a consolidation spend out of your vault is any normal spend. Could be $5 worth of Bitcoin to another vault. Could be sending Bitcoin to a single signature address that you hold the keys to. It could be donating $10 worth of Bitcoin to the Human Rights Foundation. Any spend out of your vault does consolidate your UTXOs. So now if I go over to the vault that I spent to, we should see, and it is, as you can see, I have many vaults. It should be the webinar vault. We should see a pending transaction coming through here. And it might be coming through here shortly. But in any case, and this might be taking a while to hang up, but we do see that pending transaction now coming into my vault. So we do know that the Bitcoin has been sent over to my other webinar vault. And now once this is confirmed on the Bitcoin blockchain, the miners have added it to a block. We will be all set to go, and my UTXOs will have been consolidated. So at this point, I'm going to slide back over to our agenda screen, and I'm going to kick it over to Matt at this point to go through, good practices as we think about UTXO consolidation, prevention, and then eventually advanced consolidation, and when we might kind of bring in the big guns with Caravan to help out with this. Matt, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler.
Of course.
So some future good practices in prevention. There's a few questions I've seen come in the chat, and I think what I'm about to talk about will help answer some of those, but keep the questions coming. We love it, and we'll have some dedicated time after this to go through them all. So the first recommendation is we encourage people to just perform these consolidations periodically as part of routine maintenance. So some general guidelines, it's not a hard and fast rule, but every 15 to 20 deposits into your vault. That'll be, have 15 to 20 UTXOs, especially if you're using a cold card as one of your keys. We recommend doing it around this number to guarantee signing. Additionally, another variable to consider, which Buck has gone in depth into, is just do this when fees are low. You don't have to, but there's some tools where you can sign up to be notified when the mempool fees are in a favorable environment, and that you'll just save time and money consolidating your transaction then, as long as you're not in a rush and there's no sense of urgency. And so we'll drop those links in the chat. We'll be sharing this presentation around as well once the recording goes live that has all this information in, but it's just good practice. That's what I personally do, is I try and do it when fees are low. Another one is just pre-consolidate your UTXOs before sending them to your multi-signature cold storage vault. So for example, I dollar cost average on Swan, and I let it build up to a reasonable threshold before I send them to my Unchained vault. Now, the threshold is it's a personal decision. There's no sort of like dollar or specific threshold we recommend, but just whatever you feel comfortable with. So for example, you could do it monthly or you could do it bi-weekly. And then over the course of a year, you might have 12 to 24 deposits into your vault, at which point, oh, now it's time to consolidate that. And so that's kind of how we like to think about it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about advanced features using Caravan. So you might be asking, what happens if I go into my vault and I do a consolidation and my devices don't sign for it? That could be pretty scary. Don't fret. There's nothing wrong. You still have access to your Bitcoin. You still hold the keys to that Bitcoin. It's just that you have too many UTXOs for your devices to consolidate in a single transaction. However, with Caravan, you can do this across multiple transactions. And so there is a YouTube video linked here that we'll share around that walks you through how to do that. But I also wanted to include some screenshots on what that looks like. So if you're familiar with downloading your recovery file and uploading it into Caravan, you can conduct a manual spend, which is what that little red switch is. If you see that in the screenshot, when you turn that on, you can actually expand each of your addresses and see how many UTXOs are in them. So this is also good if you just want to visualize what all of your UTXOs in your vault are. You don't even need to do a spend. It can be fun sometimes to just download your recovery file, upload it to Caravan, and get a sense for the lay of the land. So, okay, I have this many UTXOs. Do you mind go to the next slide, Tyler? So if you do need to consolidate across multiple transactions, you can do that through Caravan. So you upload your file, as I mentioned. You can choose the specific UTXO. So you can choose 15 to 20 at a time. Say you have 60 of them. You can just do 3 transactions of 20 UTXOs each. As you can see here, this is the transaction preview screen where I've selected 3 UTXOs from that single address. And it shows you the rest of the details, and then you can go through the signing flow just as you would doing a normal recovery transaction. This is a great way if your vault gets a bit unruly and there's too many UTXOs, you can just, it takes a little bit of extra time and steps, but you could still are totally fine. You can recover all of that and consolidate through Caravan.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. I think that was a really just good overview. Again, best practices, prevention, how are we thinking about this? And then also that scenario, like Buck was mentioning earlier, these resource constrained computers, they might not be able to sign a transaction in one transaction to consolidate. And even if that's the case, we do have tools that are available with that UTXO selection. That's really, really powerful. So at this point, I do, want to mention, we ran through a bunch of stuff. Again, UTXO consolidation is a more complex topic. So we do want to spend a good amount of time answering questions and talking about this stuff. And I know there was some really good questions that came in just during the course of the entire talk. So Matt, I guess we can start with you if you saw any ones come through that you really want to pinpoint right away.
Sure. All right, let's see. We had one from Heidi that said, should we create a consolidation vault to transfer consolidations to? This is a great question. So the answer is you don't have to, but we certainly recommend that you do that and you keep it all inside. We recommend multi-signature is the best way to store your Bitcoin. And so creating a consolidation vault makes this process very simple. We had one around, can you select which UTXOs you want to combine? And so in Caravan, you can. And that was what I was just walking through. In the YouTube video, we'll go show you in explicit detail how to do that exactly.
Awesome.
Another great question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say a great question that I saw as I'm looking through the questions as well. Does it matter how often I do this? For instance, in a year, yearly, maybe every 6 months, every 2 years, does it matter the amount of deposits, the amount of total UTXOs, or that's 12, 50, or 100 UTXOs? I think the answer to that is, it's really up to the cadence with which you deposit to your vault. If you are depositing to your vault every month, and that's kind of the general guideline. Of course, maybe we have one-off buys of Bitcoin here and there that we then send to our vault, but just using that framework of depositing to your vault once a month, then at the end of the year, you're going to have 12 UTXOs in your vault. For good practices, and as Matt was mentioning, 15 to 20 UTXOs, you might want to think about doing a consolidation spend. So 12, wouldn't put you quite at that point, but it would get to the point where you'd start thinking about it. So it's really up to the cadence with which you do deposit to your vault.
So a couple good questions. One from David around, this is cool, but what about for non-technical people? Is there a way to make this super simple for them? And then also, would it be possible for Unchained to add a single click option to automate this? So the answer is yes, we do have plans in 2022 to offer a much simpler sort of one-click-ish workflow for doing this. So stay tuned. Another question, are there tax implications of combining UTXOs? So I will, of course, give the necessary disclaimer that I'm not a tax attorney or a CPA, but simply combining UTXOs, there's no tax implications. Now, if you were to go sell that Bitcoin afterwards, then yes, of course, there would be tax implications, and your UTXOs could have been acquired at different prices, right? And you would need to be sort of make sure you're keeping track of all of that and work with your CPA on how to best, how to best figure that out for your tax bill. But there's no particular tax implications around combining UTXOs, but you should be thinking about that in the future if you're going to sell all of those combined UTXOs, how that shakes out.
I'd like to take one real quick. There's one about why not do 1 sat per byte. I'll combine this with a question of why we don't allow 1 sat per byte fees. So I like the question of why not do 1 sat per byte. So, and this ties into a few of the other questions that we've had. The reason, so I think it's important to separate in our minds the difference between a rate and the absolute fees, right? So, and one of the nice things about doing a consolidation is presumably if you're doing consolidations, it's not a time-sensitive transaction, right? So if we go back to the shipping metaphor, it would be like sending my Christmas present in October or right, like several months in advance. So I don't care if it takes 2 weeks, a month, whatever to send. So you can do that with your consolidation too, right? You pick the lowest fees possible to send the consolidation, because if it doesn't arrive in the next block, okay, that doesn't matter if it takes 6 blocks, even if fees are a little bit high, but you want to make sure you've consolidated ahead of time. If it looks like fees are going to keep on getting higher, it's okay. You wait, you set it to 10 sats per byte, maybe fees are a little bit higher, and you can wait. And that way, when you have an urgent transaction to send, and this is why not do 1 sat per byte? Some people need a transaction to get in immediately, right? Again, let's say you're trying to you're making a big purchase on a house or something, right? Or you need to recollateralize your loan. You can't wait for, and fees are high, right? You don't want to wait for several blocks until your transaction goes in. Now, as to the why we don't allow 1 sat per byte fees, I think allow is the wrong word here, just because, these are still your funds. You can do whatever you want with them. You don't actually need Unchained at all. So if for some reason you really wanted to save on fees and do lower, you can use Caravan. But again, this is just for emergencies. It will mess up some balances. But the reason why on our platform, the UI keeps a floor at 3 sats per byte, it's really just a foot gun. It's a foot gun protection measure. We have had people that don't fully understand what's going on with fees and think they're like, oh, well, I want to pay as low as possible, and don't understand the implications sometimes. And because there's real value, real wealth, real world implications to people's transactions, we don't want people to get stuck with pending transactions, which then can cause a lot of problems down the line. So again, it's still your Bitcoin. So if you need to send for less, then you absolutely can. We are not a custodian, so you can do whatever you want with your Bitcoin, but it's just on our platform to help avoid those types of mistakes.
I'd like to take one. I have a question, just a really quick answer is, could you provide a link to download Caravan? So great question, as we have highlighted Caravan a couple times. Caravan lives in the browser. So Caravan can be found on caravanmultisig.com. That will redirect you to our GitHub page where you can find Caravan. You can, of course, fork it and run it locally, but it is also linked In the Vault platform as well, if you select that external spend info to view your wallet configuration file contents, there's a link there that says Caravan, and it's a hyperlink. I would suggest bookmarking Caravan, since it does live in the browser. A really easy way for you to access it in the future would be just to bookmark it.
And one nice thing is that Caravan is kind of unique in the wallet world, in that you can visualize your UTXOs. And so to just get an idea of what it actually looks like, you can load up you don't even have to spend, right? So you don't have to have access to your hardware devices at all. You load up the wallet configuration file and you can view your balances, but you can also view the UTXOs. So if you wanted to see how many UTXOs you had, what it would look like to create that spend, you can go into Caravan and experiment with that as well. So there's one question here I'll answer as well that I think we've kind of touched on, but again, just to highlight. So the question is, does it make sense to do this often if I have no plans to spend my BTC in the foreseeable future? Why not just consolidate prior to a withdrawal? So the answer to that, why not consolidate prior to a withdrawal, is what happens if that withdrawal is time sensitive and fees are high. Right. So this is really just a maintenance thing, right? You're doing best practices ahead of time so that if something were to happen down the line, you're not stuck. Remember, the way that transactions work is you have to have all of your inputs add up to the value that you want to send. This makes it really hard to know the situation you're planning for ahead of time. If you want to send half a Bitcoin, that's going to be a very different situation from if you want to send 1 BTC. You can also get into weird situations where the number of UTXOs that you need to add up to the value that you're sending will be different based on the amount that you're sending. So you can actually have, for example, a situation where it will be significantly more expensive to send $50 of Bitcoin than it would be to send $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. If I have 1 UTXO that adds up to $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, that will be 10 times cheaper to send than a $50 withdrawal that has 10 UTXOs. I think I said 10x, but you get the idea, right? So it's all about preparing and making sure, because it's hard to know that amount that you're going to be spending and how those UTXOs will add up in the future. But if they're all added up, right? If I have 1 UTXO that's worth $100,000 and I'm sending $50, you could use that 1 UTXO, right? And you would have one output that sends $50, and you'd have a second one of change that sends the remaining balance back to a single address.
I have one that I'm seeing here come through. It says, does it matter where a consolidation spend goes? You did a transfer within Unchained, so from one vault to another vault, but I assume the same effect is reached through sending to any wallet anywhere. Like for an example, $5 to Blue Wallet is what the question asks. And you're absolutely right. It's just any type of spend out of your vault of any amount. And I think that might answer another question as well. Just by conducting a spend out of your vault, you are consolidating all of the UTXOs in that vault. I chose to spend it to another vault that I had created just because it was a way for me to send it to myself, and all of my Bitcoin is protected in multi-signature by me doing that. So sending from one vault to another. But your question stands, it's absolutely correct, is that you could send $5 worth of Bitcoin out to a single signature address, like one in your Trezor suite or on Blue Wallet, for example, and the consolidation impact is still the same.
John asked a really good question. He says, so what happens if you initiate a UTXO consolidation but selected a low custom fee, but fees continue to move higher? Will the consolidation get stuck in the mempool? And if so, is there a way to change it after the fact? This is a really, really, really good question. And so for those who don't know, the mempool is essentially where you send a transaction and it gets considered for mining, essentially. It's kind of the Bitcoin transaction limbo until they get selected by miners, and it's how miners select transactions. So, but then that's basically before you have a confirmation. So if you ever see confirmations in wallets, that's basically 0 confirmations, the transaction sitting in the mempool. 1 confirmation, a miner selected it from the mempool and added it to a block. 2 confirmations, it's now been, there's a new block mined since then. So fees are notoriously difficult to estimate because of this precise thing. We don't know how fees will move in the future. So you could select a relatively low fee now because you see that the fees look, you know, okay, it's not moving anywhere. But for whatever reason, let's say an exchange was really irresponsible and just put a flood of transactions into the mempool, and their fees are higher than yours, but not super high that it gets cleared out. So now you don't know what's going to happen. This could be really tricky, and you have no way to know. So this is why if you have an urgent transaction, you might want to set fees a little bit higher anyway, just in case. It depends on the urgency. This is all subjective. One thing that you can do, so there's something called RBF, which is replaced by fee, which is not available right now with Unchained transactions, but it is in our roadmap soon. But even without that, you can do something that's called child pays for parent. We actually, we've mentioned this advanced Caravan webinar that we did a few months ago. And in that, I show how to do a child pays for parent. And very briefly, what a child pays for parent is let's say you have this parent transaction that John described that's in the mempool, it gets stuck. That's the parent transaction. What you can do is if in that transaction you have an output that goes back to your own wallet, i.e. it sends to an address for which you control the private key, you can spend that output in a child transaction. And in that child transaction, you can have a higher fee that pays for that the parent transaction as well. So let's say you did 5 Satoshis per byte in the parent one, all of a sudden fees go up. You can have a child transaction that pays 50 Satoshis per byte. And the miners will only get that, the fees from the child, if they also mine the parent. And that's how you can get both in. You can't do this right now through the Unchained platform, but you can in Caravan. And again, you have to make sure you have control over those private keys. But yeah, great question.
Saw you go off mute, Matt. Did you have one you wanted to answer?
I'm just reading through some of the new ones that just came in. I think a lot of them have been answered.
Awesome. I see one really quickly. It says, does it make sense to have a main wallet at Unchained and all my purchases go to, and then a second consolidation vault? How many vaults can I have? So I think that is a really good question. Well, then I moved the slide back there accidentally. So when we think about how many vaults can you have, you can create as many vaults as you'd like using your 2 keys. If you're going to be consolidating and you want to keep your Bitcoin protected by multi-signature, by all means, create a second vault, and it could even be titled, consolidation vault. And you periodically do your consolidations over there. That way, you know that your funds are being secured by multi-sig, by your 2 keys. And there is no, hard and fast limit on the amount of vaults that you can create. So it really is that same process of selecting vaults on the left-hand side, selecting new, and then naming your vault and picking your keys for your vault, just like you did with your existing vault. Perfect. So I think with that, unless there are more questions that either of you see, what we can go ahead and do is take a pause on questions for now. You have been fantastic question providers throughout this process. I think we've answered a bunch of really good ones as we're thinking about this stuff. I do want to give a hat tip to my colleague here on the concierge team, Phil Geiger, who's framed it with clients as it's just a part of your responsibility now as a Bitcoin key holder to consolidate your UTXOs every now and then. It's wash your car, make your bed, consolidate your UTXOs. So just remember that as Unchained clients, you do have access to these webinars. They're going to be the first Friday of every month. The next webinar coming up is going to be on December 3rd at 11 a.m. Central Time, and it is going to be restoring hardware devices and recovering seeds. That is going to be the topic. I think that's really going to be an impactful one as well, much like this UTXO management. These are practices now that, as key holders, it's really, really good to have a strong and competent hold on. So looking forward to see all of you over there at that next webinar. Thank you for joining us on a Friday, and I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Buck and Matt, feel free to give sign-offs as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. This was great. The questions were awesome. I had a blast. This was my first one, so I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, a lot of fun. Yeah, take a look at those articles if you're interested in learning more. I think I mentioned in the chat, I include some math in the fees article, so you can actually see your theoretical savings and apply that to your own transactions. And feel free to reach out. I'm on Twitter at least. You can find me if you have any other fee related questions at Buck Pearly. So yeah, see y'all there.
Awesome.
Until the next
Thank
one.
you. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.